Um, I'm Jim Ancona. I'm the Front Ensemble Arranger for Crown, and I'm being joined online here by Andrew Monteiro, who's
Hello.
yeah, who's the one of the arrangers as well for the electronics. And I want to start by thanking everyone for coming to this. This is awesome, and really for all the folks at Crown who made this possible, and especially for Taylor Womack, who's there, who's done a lot of the behind the scenes organizing, which is fantastic. No small feat. Um, what we want to do today, or tonight rather, depending where you are, is talk about our creative process. And I think we do some things a little bit differently at Crown. And I think is a real fresh take on things, on how we do some things. So we'll talk through that. We want to talk about maybe how to get started as a writer and just doing creative things, no matter what your level of experience is. And maybe we can talk. I really want to encourage the community to get on the chat element of this. So go down to your participants area and your chat area so that we can do some polling and talk about things and get some input from everybody. So be ready for that. And maybe talk about some of the stuff together as a community, stuff that we do and don't like when we receive music, like, hey, I just got my vibe part and there's no pedaling or dynamics or time signature. What things drive you crazy, so we can all kind of learn to be better at that. And so let me start with this. If you can go to your participants button, if everyone wants to press their participants button, and maybe we could do some quick polls pressing yes buttons and no buttons. But how many a quick yes or no, like front ensemble people who's played in a front ensemble, just click yes real quick in there. Yeah, wow, so we've got quite a few. Okay, some no's in there, but yeah, predominantly front ensemble players. Very cool. Okay. Next, let's clear that. How many people have done, how many, let me ask this, how many writers do we have? Whether you're writing for front ensemble or battery or both, do we have any of those? Yeah, quite a few. Cool. And it's okay if you're not. We're happy to start kind of at the ground level of what we do. And one last thing, how many people of very little or no writing experience? Anyone who has very little or no writing experience? That's okay too. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna start. One of the first things we're gonna do. Cool. Yeah, quite a few people that are pretty new to that as well. We want to start by kind of, for Andrew and I, just quick little chat about how we started writing. And for me, in high school, like my high school marching band was pretty average, and I wasn't writing that kind of thing in high school. In high school, I was writing like rock tunes and recording stuff, and that way, like writing songs, so that creativity was coming out in that way. But when I got to college, I went to UMass, and Tom Hannum was there, and I saw a good drum line. I saw a good front ensemble, and we had a good marimba ensemble as well. So people wanted to write for those ensembles. There were a lot of students who wanted to write for those ensembles. So that's really where it started for me, was in college, and I got opportunities to write things for all of those groups and hear them played, which was kind of a big deal. Andrew, what did you do? How did you get started? What's your story?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it definitely started with marching band in high school. Like I had always been interested in music when I was younger, but it didn't. It really took off, obviously, in high school. For me, I actually was really into movie soundtracks and stuff like that, and I would just listen to them all the time. And then I ended up just wanting to figure out, like, why do I like the way this sounds? Like, what are the chords you're using? Like, this was before I even was taking any kind of theory classes. So I ended up just listening to something over and over again and just transcribing it. And that skill is really helpful for me now. But I did that quite a lot. And I would end up having this like piano score of just like, okay, well, everything's in the piano. Here's the bass. Here's the melody. And then because I was interested in percussion, I actually did snare drum in marching band in high school, but I was also interested in like, marimbas and stuff like that. So I ended up just taking what that transcription was that I had, and this wasn't like I could go online, and now there's tons of already like transcriptions you can find. I didn't know that at the time, but I would just end up copying like, okay, the marimba part will be the melody, and then I'll use a timpani for the bass part, just the percussion instruments that I knew, and I just kind of took that transcription and then just kind of played around with that. There wasn't really any intention to like, oh, this is going to be played or whatever. It was just me interested in like what I was hearing and applying it to instruments that I'd like to play. And then kind of as I started getting more in depth with the marching arts, pretty much just like what Jim was saying was like, a lot of high schools, were looking for people that, that didn't just have like experience writing, but had experience playing marimbas and stuff like that. So I kind of got started with, some of my local high schools here. And then like one of the big breakouts for me was when this group, Cadets Winter Percussion, started. And I was teaching Cadets 2 at the time, and they had asked me if I could write. And I hadn't even do indoor, but I was being asked to kind of write an indoor show. So it was like a huge leap for me to go from just like high school to like, okay, now design a whole show from, scratch. And that kind of baptism by fire, I would call it, really helped hone the skills that I use today. So that's kind of how my like origin story as it is.
The origin story, I like that. So I guess ultimately we want to talk about our process at Crown, and certainly do the majority of this. We want to talk about. We want to look at scores and listen to things and have questions. But I think it's important to think about what are some daily exercises or exercises that you could do for creativity. And I thought about that, and it'd be great to like we'll list a few things, but put some stuff in the chat as well that you use. But I think it's really important as a player, even before you get to notation software, this and that, but just improvising and creating on your instrument. Like if you're on a keyboard percussion instrument, it could be, hey, here's a particular skill set I want to work on. Maybe it's like inside runs or lateral rolls or whatever skill set, and just start to improvise. For me, that's how a lot of my exercises were written. I just sat down on a keyboard and started playing something and created, or maybe it's based on some chord progressions that you like, or just like Andrew was saying, even a tune that you like to play. Just create something. Don't worry about notating it yet. Just record it, see if you like it. If you like it, then maybe you can notate it, and then maybe you can further develop it. Some people will do that creative process through their like a digital audio workstation like GarageBand, and just kind of create tunes even before they notate it. So that's one thing to do. I tell people, and I think it's real important for front ensemble people, don't be just a consumer of the music. Like, I like to play, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to play this chart. Contribute something. Contribute exercises, contribute a lot tune. I would imagine that your instructors, and I encourage instructors to do this, I imagine if you brought something to your instructor, they're going to want to have the group play it. You don't want to bring it the week before BOA finals, obviously, and say, hey, I have a K-pop medley I want us to learn. Like, at the right time of the season or even the off season, people are going to want to do that stuff. It's real important to have your stuff played and to get the feedback from people. Andrew, you were talking about some other cool stuff, just like even going through your libraries and getting.
Oh yeah, like having this idea that like you know exactly what sound you're looking for, you know exactly, you know, that only comes from being familiar with the sources you have available. Now, you know, a lot of these libraries can be really expensive. But, you know, if you have, you know, GarageBand, which is, you know, free and very common, you know, even just cycling through that and just listening to different sounds or whatever, like different synth patches, um, can help just inspire. You know what I mean? Just surround yourself with getting familiar with whatever sources you have available. You know, and if you do have, you know, money to afford a library, then, you know, something that I do all the time is, all right, what's this sound? Play it, listen to it. Oh, I didn't know I had that sound in my library, you know? And then just going through it, like it feels like a tedious process, and but you know, I don't want there to be just like this conception that's like, oh, I know exactly what sound to use every single time, because it's just not true. Like, I mean, there's sounds that you get familiar with, like, oh, you know, I used that sound, I really liked it, I'm gonna do it again. But I only got to the point with being able to sit there and just being like, oh, what's this sound? It's called like radio fuzz techno. What does that mean? You know, like, it's, you know, the names are just sometimes ridiculous, but cycling through them and just messing around with this, start messing around, like, you know, there's a cool little like mono patch, and you just start playing in octaves up and down, like something really simple just to get a feel for it. You can mess around with different knobs and stuff, like, you know, same with Front Ensemble, same with sound design. Like, it's all about tweaking, like messing around with different things and never really settling on one strict way to do it. There's obviously ways that are strong, which we'll talk about, but I think being able to just explore and is important.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing, particularly with synthesizers or sample libraries, that yeah, playing them, you learn how to use them. You know what I mean? Like the sound inspires the playing sometimes. You know, like, you know, you hear a funky analog patch, you're gonna play, you know, a cool bass line or whatever with it. It's gonna inspire stuff. And you were telling me before, Andrew, like, you know, yeah, some of those programs are ridiculously expensive, but uh, some of them are starting to do like subscription uh,
Yes.
pricing now too. Like East West has, you can get the sample libraries and download them and do like a monthly subscription with them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, one of them, I do use East West, and it's like, you know, there's a yearly plan you can get, but then it's also like you just want to try it for like 1 month. I think they even have like student discounts or whatever, and like there's hundreds of thousands of sounds, and there's millions of variations on them. And you know, I think one of the libraries that is most used in the activity that we're in is probably Omnisphere. Um, and I'm not sure what the if they do have pricing for that or not.
I haven't heard of that, but yeah, it's like $500.
It's definitely pricey, but
Yeah, it's a pricey one, but it's like 14,000 sounds, and each
yeah,
one of those sounds spins off into another 1,000 sounds, and um, yeah, but yeah, those the sample libraries being subscription is pretty affordable, and that's like
yes.
extreme pro level stuff. That's the best stuff there is. So,
Hmm.
um, but getting on to a little bit about how we start at Crown. I will talk a little bit about, you know, we have a design team, obviously, that's, you know, represents each of the captions, as well as the program coordinator, Rick Subel. And, you know, after we choose, this is, you know, maybe this would be September, October, we choose our theme of the show, and we start getting into source music that we want to use. Um, and we're starting to think about how we're going to treat that music to fit into the show concept. And so we're thinking broad ideas there musically, but we're also getting specific about what moods we want for particular movements, scenes we want to have happen, styles of music, staging is happening, prop design, the field layout, costuming. I'm thinking as a front ensemble person, what sound palette, you know, like what accessory sounds are going to work for the beast. I wanted membrane sounds. I wanted scrapey sounds and rattling sounds, and that's beast-like to me. So just thinking of like a sound palette that will work conceptually. And we're starting even before we've written a note. We may be thinking about musical roles within the music. So we're thinking in general terms, but it's surprising at times that even before we've written a note, we have a good idea of prop layout. We have a good idea of where we want the front ensemble, where the speaker layout, and all the rest of that stuff. So a lot of those things are thought through. But when it gets to actually getting the source music out there, we have to start with a rough draft. And I think this is one thing that Crown does that's really pretty cool. That rough draft, that first draft we get of a piece of music, it could be like for this year, I won't talk specifics, but like, for example, the opener this year, or the opening statement, didn't come through a brass arrangement. That started with Andrew doing a sketch based on sound design. And I'll let Andrew talk about that in a second, but sometimes it could be the battery starting first with the actual concept and layout of the tune. A lot of times it will be Michael Klesch doing the brass layout, but when we're getting that initial sketch, we kind of like the person who we think is going to be best or center stage sound-wise, whether it's percussion focus or soundscape focus or brass focus, that person will start the process. Andrew, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so, without kind of revealing too much about what we did have planned for the summer, but, this movement kind of had a certain feel that was going to be characterized by the synth sounds that we heard. So part of the direction was to obviously say, okay, well, what kind of sounds can you provide? Like what's, and the thing is that it's not just only about the sounds. Like I was even able to just kind of sketch certain ideas for, okay, here's like a drum set part, or here's like an idea for the phrasing and stuff like that. So when we say, it's a sound design sketch, it doesn't mean that it's just, only samples. It's more of like, here's how these samples and these synth ideas are connected, and it creates this, I guess rough draft is the best way to put it, that the other designers can then come in and say, okay, you know what, like, I get the idea of what you kind of sketched here for, for the front ensemble, and then Jim might take that and run with it. And then that gives him, the ability to kind of, even help with just moving things forward quickly and moving things forward quickly and just providing a different way to look at things. And even with the battery, like, this was a part where I had worked closely with Travis as well, who's the battery arranger. And, when I created a phrase that had this, specific kind of sound and the length of it was what it needed to be, he might come in and then say, you know what, actually, I have this idea that fits well with this, but it needs to be twice as long. So it's like, okay, well then now we're kind of growing from there. So it's not just about, what part is more important, but like what's going to be able to create the most amount of branching off points for the other designers. So that's kind of how the impetus for this movement started.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is interesting for us is when we do get a chart that starts with the brass, we really like to have the brass one rehearsal camp ahead of us a lot of the times, so that they're going to make sure that the pieces in the key that they like, that the parts that they really want to focus on are playable and achievable, so that when we finally get that brass chart, all the bugs are out, or a lot of the bugs are out. Like they've figured out the key they want to be in. I've heard them do endings of a opener in different keys to just make sure it's like, hey, we like this one more. So the whole chart changed to fit one certain moment that they've wanted. So that process is really good. Rather than everyone writing and then finding out the brass aren't happy with something or the percussion aren't happy with something, we kind of vet that score a little bit. And that initial sketch as well is real important, because that person is, as Andrew said, they're kind of setting the pacing for that chart, where the exposures are going to be, where the space for percussion is going to be. When I get brass charts, I love when there's cues in there. I like seeing cues. I like to see how they thought of the whole entire musical picture. Michael doesn't suggest orchestration to me or anything. He just says, here's a melody that I think the front ensemble should play. So it is very much a collaborative process in that way.
It also goes the other way too. Like, when you have your front ensemble scores, that are based on that, and then it comes to me, you have those also notes and ideas for like, hey, this is kind of where this fit sampling effect can also go.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting when we look at scores. You'll see some stuff. I was telling Andrew, you'll see stuff that's like, hey, this was written, the pit stuff was written, and that inspired the battery stuff, or the battery stuff was written first, that inspired the pit stuff. There was something that I wrote in 2016 for Roxanne, a run at the end, that was written first. The run was written before the brass stuff was orchestrated, which I'd never done before, but it just happened to work for that thing. So we'll look at that. So yeah, it's I like that we do it that way. I did so many years, and I'm sure because Andrew writes a lot of front ensemble stuff too. He's not just an electronics guy. Where it was the typical brass first or winds first. Now the battery has to get their run at, and the pit is trying to shoehorn parts in where they can, because there's all the breadcrumbs have been eaten. So we don't quite do it that way. But I want to talk about some specific things. I want to get into the process of talking about like some specific things about the front ensemble, and we'll go. I don't want to take too long on this because I want to make sure we look at a bunch of scores. But let me do this. I'm going to share my screen, and I have a. Now you know this is serious because we can look at a PowerPoint. So this isn't what I want. Let's go to the beginning of this. Look at this. This is very official. Yes, look at that.
Ooh, very official.
Yes, that is very official. So pre-writing. Before we do this is a thing that people realize, like I can't write until I have a pit setup chart. I need to sketch it out, know what it looks like. It's actually kind of approved by the design team. Last year when we were on the field on that angle, that was like a design team decision. It wasn't my decision, but like that all had to be sketched out and approved and thought through and all the rest of that stuff. As a writer, you have to know where the players are, where the sounds are coming from, and even there, what instruments they have at their board. Let me show you what our, oops, that's not what I wanted. Here we go. Let me show you I won't do it this way. So here's what go away. What our setup looked like for this year. And I do this on PowerPoint. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is what we started, like the pit members will tell you, this is what we started with at the beginning. And like this whole area over here was a complete cluster, and like people were running into each other. And our last meeting, like the last thing we said, this is what we're going to go with. And this, now I know, here it is, here's the setup. And here's the drum set and synths, and I can give this to the PA people so that they can start thinking about wiring and how they want to do all the rest of that stuff. So that's a big part. I literally can't function until I have that that chart set up. And then after that, this is another interesting Crown thing. Then we decide, once we have that chart, we're ready to write, we decide, all the percussion writers decide where people are going to start writing. We had a chart this year where, or last year, I think it was our Dark Skies last year, where Travis started at the beginning, to do the battery features and sketch that out. Tom Hannum started at the end to do the impacts, and I started at kind of the small ensemble section, like the letter B section. We all started in different places, and then, you know, after a week of writing, we compared notes and then kind of went off of other people's cues and all the rest of that stuff. So again, some pit stuff was inspired by battery writing, and some battery stuff was inspired by pit writing, and we'll look at that. Next thing I do is write a phrase chart to start sketching out ideas. I don't go right to Sibelius and start writing notes. I have to kind of just write down some rough ideas of what I want to do, some clues about instrumentation or orchestration, really basic ideas. I do a simple harmonic analysis of the brass score so that I can see. Some people will do a reduction of it in Sibelius. I just do a quick, like, analysis of it and try to get into the harmonic language a little bit and start thinking about the roles that the front ensemble will have in the score. Are we the lead voice or counter melody? What are we doing in there? Are we impacts? What voices I want to start using? And also dynamically, what am I competing with? If this section we're thinking, hey, I'm going to write a run in here, am I competing with the whole horn line, or is it a solo idea? Obviously, all of that will affect my orchestration. I'm thinking about my choirs that I have. Do I want to use metal sounds? Do I want to use wood sounds? The drums or the membranes? Or am I going to sketch out like a synthesizer idea first and let Andrew run with it? I always write with a list of every accessory sound we own and have so that I can think through that and think of those sounds. I think about what colors I want to present. You know, again, before I write a note, what colors do I want to have and how am I going to paste those colors? So it could start off with, this phrase is going to be woods, and then we're going to add metallic sounds here, and then we're going to all go to suspended cymbals. It will peak right here, and just a rough idea of how I think I want to do it. And I wrote a little note there of not falling into the trap of, as you're kind of making those basic ideas and basic decisions, not falling into the trap of that young writers do sometime of, like, they get worried when everyone's not playing. It's like, oh, I feel bad for Timmy on the bells because he has 8 bars of rest. It's like, well, if there doesn't need to be a bell part there, don't write a bell part there. Okay, don't fall into that trap. I certainly used to do that when I was younger. And Andrew, you wrote this down.
Yeah, so, just to kind of back up for just a second, like if I look at a score that, Jim has orchestrated and taken those things into consideration, the choirs, the roles and stuff like that, I have to use that information to enhance the same goals. So, the same way that we decide, like, oh, who's going to start looking at this chart first? Well, that's also setting up the goals that Jim just outlined. I can't just come in and say, oh, well, why can't we have a bass drop every single bar, when Jim wants to focus on the metallic color, So setting up those priorities is important for the sound designer to kind of take and use as a roadmap. So then the point was knowing the difference between a supportive and a transformational kind of sound. So, I think just off the top of my head, like something where it's like, if Jim is going for a choir that is more metallic sounding, and maybe he wrote in like, a wind chime, then that kind of gives me an idea of what kind of sounds I could put over there. Put some kind of like atmospheric sparkle kind of thing. And if he has a suspended cymbal roll that kind of just chokes, like, okay, well, maybe there's an opportunity there to enhance that suspended cymbal roll. So it's a little bit, sharper or even louder or whatever. And, maybe adding, some slight transformational idea to it. Maybe it sounds a little bit, more sizzly, or maybe it sounds a little bit, maybe it has a little bit of a darker rise under it. So that's what I would say is kind of the supportive sounds, where it's like sounds that enhance what the main goals of a phrase are. And these are sounds you may not even know are actually in there. It's not like I want people to hear every single sound. I want them to notice, wow, the pit sounds so bright. The colors are, the bells, gratales, the vibes. But then there's other layers where they're not going to say, oh, I really love, Sparkle Sample 3. They're not going to say that, but it's about enhancing that. And then, the transformational sound reinforcement, I think that's more of opportunities where the electronics kind of speak on their own, or maybe that they're on with the battery and stuff like that. Because this activity, right, like it is about the live performers. It's about the brass players. It's about the percussion players. It's about the color guard. And as a sound designer, my idea is that, okay, I want this to be all about what kind of crazy sound can I do. Like, I want the performers to be enhanced by what I do. And sometimes that means taking a step back, but it's important that there's a balance. And at Crown, I think, especially working with Michael, in terms of how we have sounds that enhance the brass, we're able to strike a really good balance, in my opinion, to make all those elements speak evenly. And then, we have those transformational sounds, like where can we go all out on the electronics and not have it, and actually have it be the focus. And that's where we can kind of go a little bit crazier with some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that really it goes in line with kind of the aesthetic of the music ensemble, and I think Michael Klesch kind of defines that a lot with, how he wants the horn line to sound. And there's different groups that'll do different things, but if we had a real synthetic sounding bass support underneath the horn line, he's going to hear that and say, you don't hear the horn sound anymore. Or even with field mics, he's talking about, like, somebody's got too high, like a high frequency band on there, and it's adding this sizzly sound to the trumpets, and I hear it and I don't like it. Like, there's, so we have, and some people might, so again, your team kind of has to define the aesthetic that they want and how they want the group to sound, so that the sound engineer and the sound designer don't go rogue and start, like Andrew said, putting bass drops in every other bar, and having sizzly sounding woods and woodwinds and all the rest of that stuff. So I want to, Andrew, I want to get into charts kind of like as possible. But like one thing, I'm going to look at a run, like talk about some very specific musical situations. And for the Front Ensemble, I'm going to, for acoustic keyboards, start by talking about writing a run. And I think sometimes people, they talk to me about, like, how does the creative process start? And for me, a lot of the times is when I have that chord progression and I have the tempo, I'm literally sitting at a marimba and improvising. And I'm not theorizing on my, sometimes I'll write on a piano, but I'm not sitting on a computer and theorizing runs that way scientifically. I'm sitting and playing because I need to know what skill sets work at that tempo and in that key. It's like, okay, this is too fast for this type of run. I need to do something a little bit different, or this is too fast to be doing these alternating strokes or whatever. So same as a battery writer would do. Like, you're going to sit down on a pad and see what works and feels good at that tempo. It's no different for me on the keyboard instruments. Okay. So again, having a good working knowledge of some and good technical skills on the instrument certainly helps in that writing process. So let me go to, this is where things could get crazy. We'll see. And as far as technology, because some of these applications don't play well together. But can you guys see, wave some hands, you guys can see this score here, yes? Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. Okay. So this is Roxanne, the end of Roxanne from 2016. And like I said, this was written first, before the horns. All I had was this piano sketch. And see if you can hear this. I'll do a little sound check. That's all I had. Can you guys hear that? Like, I didn't have anything else other than here's a reduction of what we want to do. I don't have brass parts. I don't have anything else. So I had to write a run. And I knew if you look at the orchestration, it's all unison. This is all the keyboards are in the same register with the xylophone an octave up. This is designed to cut through the crown horn line. It needed to be an all skate loud run. And so what I did when I started creating this, the first thing is knowing that, and Tom Unks wrote these battery parts at this point, I knew I needed to create some rhythmic interest, right? I couldn't just do 16th notes because it would be pretty boring. It'd be really boring for Tom to write to it if everything's 16th note based. It really limits his vocabulary as well. So I'm thinking holistically for the percussion. So you could see 8th notes to triplets to 16th notes to some syncopated figures in there. There are all sorts of different ideas. And you get to triplets in groups of 4 here, so it has like a half note triplet feel. And it has a nice rhythmic flow to it. Also, it has a nice, within that rhythmic flow, a nice accent pattern that kind of outlines a different rhythmic flow within it. So there's a lot of rhythmic. I do have a battery background. I did play snare drum a lot in high school and college. So, I speak that language, and I write battery stuff as well. I know what I like to write to. So it's something to think about, front ensemble writers, if you get a chance to write first, is keeping the rhythm and accent structure interesting. As well, there needed to be some dynamic shaping in there as well. Okay, we need to make music. There has to be musical direction. And really, for me as well, I don't like runs that sound noodly, in meaning that they don't sound like they're going anywhere. And I mean that from a melodic standpoint. In here, you can see there's voice leading. If you, like there's like a tune within it, like all these accented notes are like leading you somewhere. Okay, so I don't want to talk about it too much. I want you to hear it and see what it sounds like. I'm going to turn the brass off so you can just hear. Let's just hear the keyboards. This will be a nice clean run for the keyboards. Okay, and this is you can see that this is marimbas on the bottom. There I did 4 separate vibe parts because we were split at that point. Vibes were in stereo, 2 on one side, 2 on the other side, and then the xylophone on top. Let's listen to this. And then it goes into the dies irae after that, okay? So yeah, again, you could hear, listen to it again just as far as and I'll put the whole front ensemble in. Listen to it from a standpoint of the rhythmic interest, the melodic interest as far as how one phrase is leading to the next, okay? It has a very kind of natural melodic sound to it. So again, a lot of that came through improv and sitting at the keyboard and just my ears kind of knowing what I wanted to hear and what sounded good, what didn't sound good. And honestly, that's probably probably about a week of experimenting and writing to get that right. To get it to be what I wanted. And Andrew, I had one other one that I wanted to show as far as a run, kind of a little bit of a more difficult thing. But if you want to go now, I can kind of get that set up for my next round.
Yeah. So, kind of jumping to a different kind of idea I wanted to share. So,
and let me add this too. I'll stop my screen share. Please, if you have questions, get in the chat and let us know, and we'll try to save, like maybe right now as Andrew's getting that set up, if anyone has any questions, if you want to get into the chat, like I can start to maybe answer those as he's going through this, or at some point.
So this example was from last year, Crown. It was from our second movement, Frolic. And specifically with this example, it's about there's a battery feature, and it kind of needed sound accompaniment. So I just want to play kind of what I was given and then kind of how I approached it. All right, so there's a lot of space in here. And obviously it wasn't just given to me like that. There was a conversation with Travis, and we kind of started thinking about, or his initial idea was to play around with the idea of, really soft dynamics, really loud dynamics. The show last year was beneath the surface, so we wanted to show under the surface, above the surface, kind of showing that range. And then he had also written cues in the score where he had he had written points where the battery was going to lift their hand up, and there was going to be a sound what that happened when the snares or the battery had their sticks up in the air. So and in discussing this, we kind of were talking about, the idea of transparency and glass and stuff like that. So I kind of took those motifs of, really soft dynamics, really loud dynamics, and glass, and then kind of here's what the final version of it was. All right, so let me scroll down over here. So all here, these are where like the fully combined samples are. So in the beginning, during those points where the battery had notated, they wanted a sound, we kind of chose this type of thing. And there's different, and basically this sound is like a combination of, like, I found like, the sound of a knife, scraping against something, a little bit of like a high-pitched sine to kind of create this high ringing sound, and then also a mix of waterphone and then earth plates that I detuned and pitch bent. But then this is just the final thing. And I think one of the difficult things for a sound designer is like when you take something blank and then they say, okay, do something. And I think to remember is that even if you're not given, notes or like a chord progression, that you still think in terms of pitch and direction. So for example, I couldn't just have every single time that the knife sound be the same sound. There still needed to be a melody, right? But we're not dealing with E flats and Fs, we're dealing with tone and pitch. So when you hear these knives, they all sound a little bit different. So all of this kind of creates a melody, but it's not, a melody that you can sing, you know what I mean? And this is going to create direction. So, so make sure that if you do have something that's as blank as that, like make sure you do have like a theme that you want to build. This one was based on glass and scraping and stuff like that. And, make a melody out of that. Don't just have it be, it doesn't have to be just like a piano E flat. That's the note that needs to be on. Find ways that you can kind of bend the pitches and stuff like that. The other point that I wanted to share was, and this is going to go into another point later about non-pitch supportive enforcement. So one of the things that I did here was make a backdrop. So the battery was going to be playing soft and really loud, and in Lucas Oil, that might come across as being thin. So I wanted a way to help create the right atmosphere, right ambience. Ooh. I think, yeah, just make sure you're muted.
Yeah, everyone okay?
Just make sure you're muted so we don't have any weird feedback. So anyway, I wanted to create a bed where these dramatic dynamics can happen. So this is what the bed is. Okay, so I don't know if you can hear that, depending if you're listening to, there's two things going on there. There's like a high-pitched kind of scraping glass sound, and then there's like a low rumble. And this is supposed to just cover those range of the frequencies that the battery won't be. So we still get this idea of it being full, but it's not just the battery playing alone by themselves. And these are sounds that aren't necessarily something where you're supposed to notice, and they're balanced in the live setting in the stadium to be this background that can help set the stage so the battery's voices can speak clearly. Yeah, and then the final little point here at the end. So, obviously the idea here that Travis was saying, he wanted it to start soft and then he wanted to get loud. And another kind of attribute that I wanted to add to that was kind of showing something beneath the surface. So kind of, putting, high cut on it so we could only hear some low frequencies. And then suddenly you're coming above the surface and now you hear the full spectrum of sounds. So I kind of did an EQ frequency pass here to create that kind of effect. And then this is also an example of where me and Jim kind of, tit for tat in certain things. There was an ending here that kind of went through iteration, and, something as simple as this ending here, with that keyboard part, that was something that I kind of had done, you know what I mean? So it's not like, it's not like we're kind of strictly going on, this is only my stuff, this is only your stuff, and I think that just makes our process a lot stronger too.
Yeah, like when Andrew's writing that, he has a vision for the whole thing, so he'll do the whole thing. It's just easier that way.
Yeah. And just the final point is, it needs to have a direction. It can't, so it's really important that I had that talk with Travis, and Dan as well, Dan Shack, to kind of create what is the basis for this? What are we trying to say? And even if the audience doesn't get that, like I don't, okay, maybe they didn't realize that it goes low and then it goes high and it's soft, loud, whatever. But it helps me to kind of focus an idea so I can actually start, because I also get really overwhelmed with, oh my God, there's so many ideas you can do. But that initial conversation about where we want things to go, and then having a motif that keeps coming back. We introduced the knife sound, the glass sound at the beginning, and then at the end, we end with it. So having something the audience can also just go back to, and does it feel foreign? Like you don't want to have a new sound every single time, because then the audience just gets fatigued. So find a way to have that pattern, consistency in your sound, so that the audience, once you introduce something, they can be familiar with it when you hear it again.
Cool. I will tell you too, from because I wasn't really involved with a lot of that creative process, but when we heard, is one of those things, when we heard Travis's initial sketch, like it didn't sound like anything. Like it was just kind of some random rhythms and this and that. Then you saw it with some body and some and movement, and you're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. Then we heard Andrew's layer over the top of that, and you're like, yeah, that's one of the coolest things. That was probably one of my top favorite things in DCI last summer, was just that phrase, and it really started. It's conceptual, It's definitely one of those things. I think that solo couldn't exist in anyone else's show because it was so beneath the surface. You know what I mean? It was so ingrained into the show concept. So that was cool. All right. Well, Andrew, you good with that? Because I wanted to show some other.
Yeah,
things.
go ahead.
And I wanted to answer a couple quick questions. Like Emmanuel is asking about what instruments would be best to use for a set part. I don't know if you're talking to like drum set or rack, but for us, like drum set is always tricky to just make sure that it's kind of stylistically correct for whatever you're using. But from a rack standpoint, again, that's one of those instruments where I just don't always feel like I have to occupy that person's time. If they need to go to another instrument, I'm going to use whatever sounds I feel are appropriate, accessory stuff, and But if your rack is just like suspended cymbals, concert tom, snare drum, just trying to be as creative with that stuff as possible with different implements and to get the sounds you need, and obviously coordinating that stuff with the battery as best as possible. I won't get to everyone's questions, but I want to show. I'm going to try to do that in the interim and just save some time. And but I want to make sure we get to as many scores as possible so people can see some stuff. I wanted to show a really quick example. Share my screen of kind of a higher level, a little bit of a more difficult run, and here it is. We'll show this. This is from Build a Pyre from 2018, and what I want to show in this is just what makes this a little bit more difficult. Is if we look at this run that's happening here in the marimbas and xylophone, is that they're holding 4 mallets, and I think the tempo is probably in the 180s or 190 or whatever. They're doing inside mallet run here, which would be one skill set. Again, you could see the kind of the voice leading and the accents and all the rest of that stuff. Then you have a new skill set here, for 6 counts of insides to a double vertical stroke. Then you have this doubles on the right hand to almost like a lateral stroke on the left hand. So that's another skill set. And that goes between triplets to sixteenths, which is again a rhythmic skill set. Then you have this contrary motion double vertical strokes to these octaves. Like every other bar is a new skill set, and that's really, really challenging from a player's standpoint to have to do something different every bar or every other bar, because it's going to feel different. Each one of these skill sets is going to feel different in your hands. So you listen to that one. Let's see if we can hear this. Okay, and again, that was born out of, that's a complete solo moment. Okay, so I didn't have to compete volume-wise. So, some of these skill sets are not the loudest things. A lot of these lateral strokes, inside mallet runs, not the loudest thing, but it didn't have to be. But that was definitely born out of improvising. Kind of creating this run and then maybe improvising this kind of thing and just playing around on the instrument and doing that. As well, this was too, this vibraphone part where they're playing the left hand is playing on the instrument, and then we were playing on these the mufflers with our right hand. So kind of creating this multitasking part to go along with it. But again, I just want to kind of show an example of this is a kind of a higher end run where we are using multiple skill sets, rapid fire skill sets, and I think that's something that front ensemble people would watch that and go, yeah, I get that. Okay, to me that is a lot more interesting than just straight 16th notes. It's certainly a lot more challenging than just a one straight rhythm. But if you're writing for less experienced groups, then it's like, okay, I'll write a run that's using maybe just one skill set, and they get to sit in that skill set for 15 counts, 16 counts, and get to settle in. That can make things a little bit easier for them as well. Okay. Before I switch it back over, I wanted to take a look at some ballad scoring, which is something that I have a lot of fun doing, and kind of have, I think over the years, particularly with Crown, kind of started to develop some, a particular style of how I like to do things. And we can kind of start with that by looking at this marimba part. You can see here, so you look at that and you go, wow, that's a lot of rhythms. And basically what I've done is a lot of ink, and like 64th notes. You don't see 64th notes a lot. But what it is it's written out roll textures, okay? Like if you look at this, basically this is a double lateral roll written out, okay? With a 16th note pulse in the right hand. Here's a triplet pulse version of the same roll, so it goes a little bit slower, okay? And that's something, skill set a lot of people have, but I write it out, okay? And then, so that's one roll style we use, the lateral roll. And then we have what I call a combination roll, where one hand is playing a double vertical, striking two notes, and the other hand is playing the lateral stroke. So it gives a little bit of a different sound in that. Okay, so why do I write out the rhythms? I write out the rhythms for a few reasons. First of all, it allows us to hit things like the peaks of crescendos on time. If we're playing all the same rhythm, we're going to arrive at that peak at the same time. It allows us to get out of these roll, also using rhythms allows us to get out of these roll figures cleanly into the next type of ideas. If we're playing a distinct rhythm, we'll be able to get in and out of skill sets easier. So it's really helped us define things a little bit better, to shape a little bit better, to give more nuance and textural change by playing exact rhythms. Another thing that you'll see here, I'll highlight this a little bit, is you can see here's the inside marimba players, here are the outside marimbas, and you can see they have mirror image parts, where while this person, they're all striking all four notes, but while this person is playing a combination roll with two lateral notes on the left hand and then the double vertical in the right hand, this person is playing the lateral notes in the right hand and the double vertical in the left hand. So what does that do? You're hearing more chord tones being struck at the same time. It makes it sound bigger and fuller. And you could see that whole mirror image thing happens throughout this whole passage. You could see it really clearly here, that this person starts with the right hand, this person's pulsing with the left hand. Gives you a big, full sound. And because I am writing in rhythms, it also softens that rhythmic feel, makes it sound a little bit more natural. But you can see here at the end, we escape from that mirror image and then go unison at the end, so that we could play these other figures, or some of these other figures together in unison. So again, that's something that is evolved over the years. It's an extremely long process to write these types of rolls out like that. A lot of people would probably just say, hey, here's a roll, here at the chord, and just play a lateral roll. But for us, I needed to refine it a little bit more. And here another thing, and we'll just listen to a chunk, and I want to pass it back to Andrew. You can hear. Here's another thing that I will commonly do. We have the melody in the metals here, and I just added a real simple harmony to it. But just with some contrary motion harmonized notes, okay? Fill out your vibe parts, make them sound a little bit more lush. But the thing that I like to do is then I just imitated that one beat later and an octave lower. So here's the melody and then here's the imitation. Gives it some textural interest. Okay, so that's something I do quite a bit of, and what we could do is we can kind of play through this and listen to a little bit of this. I'm going to mute the brass here, but you can hear those kind of textural ideas in the keyboards. You can hear how the melody gets tossed back and forth from the marimbas to the vibraphones. We create some rubato ideas, not just through actual rubato. We do a lot of rubato, but also just some more organic rhythms, 5s to 4s to 3s to 2s. Okay? And then as we get through this intro, again, just kind of trying to write, I was just trying to write parts that felt very, for lack of better terms, a marimba part that felt very marimbistic, okay? Contrary motion in the hands, feels like a solo almost, solo style writing, okay? So let's listen to a bit, and if people have some questions, we can do that. Let's, yeah, we'll listen to this, a little bit of this. At that point, we'll listen to a little bit more. The soloists enter here. So that's the pit feature is over. Now soloists enter. So we back down the orchestration, go to some single or one-handed rolls that overlap, kind of show off that skill set. And again, here's like this. This is kind of like the black page here. As far as notes, but from 64th notes to this 32nd note, 9s to 6s to 9s to 7s, all of that crazy rhythmic stuff basically just gives it a very natural, fluid, kind of organic rhythmic sound. It sounds like 4 marimba players improvised perfectly in unison. And again, here we have this imitative metallic style writing. The flugelhorn soloist actually had this motive on the downbeat, and then we echoed it on beat 2, and then again on beat 3. And then again, one of my favorite things to do, we'll listen to these kind of flourishy ideas. Again, it's a cascading metallic sound, and it's just all it is the same part echoed an 8th note later, and I think it sounds pretty cool. So we'll just listen to a little bit more, answer some questions. So I think a lot of that was sitting on the keyboard and duking it out one bar at a time. That took a solid month to write. You know, there's no shortcut for that type of stuff. Playing through every part, making sure it's achievable, making sure it sounds good, making sure their hands are in good positions, writing out all the vibe pedaling and just playing it on a vibraphone to make sure it sounds good. A lot of influence from piano playing as well. In that, because I listen to a lot of classical piano music, so that influenced a lot of the style in that, and just trying to create lush, beautiful sounds. And I know on that playback, it's like I hear that in the playback, and I know it's like, yeah, it sounds like a robot playing it back. I also know what it's going to sound like when the front ensemble plays it. I know it's going to get rid of all those edges and just make it sound beautiful, and then the staff is going to get in there and work it and make it great. So. Yeah. So if you have, we're trying to do like questions, all of that at the same time. But yeah, if Andrew, if you want to get going with something, I'll try to answer some questions for people. And
Cool.
well, maybe if you do like one more thing, I'll do one more thing, and then we can we should have people asking questions as much as possible.
Yeah. So this will just be kind of a quick thing, and it's a little bit of a unique thing. This is going to be a snippet from, not from Crown, but from George Mason University's show, 2020 show, The Outlaw. And one of the things that, as an orchestrator, that a pitfall they often have is kind of like overwriting. And I've learned the hard way many times to kind of like, you know, we said in the beginning, like people feel bad about not having someone play for 8 bars. And you know, when we look at something like that ballad, you know, it looks like it's, you know, like there's a lot going on, stuff like that, but there is an opportunity for that to exist. And if you look at that and you think everything needs to be that intricate and that thick, then you start running into a lot of problems. So you need to find the right window. So this is an example of kind of orchestrating with space and orchestrating in terms of sound design with like ambience, and what that can do to help you create that sense of fullness without being thick. So here's an example here. Cool. So there's a couple things that I kind of wanted to point out. So first is there's a large segment here where it's just featuring the snare drums here on the bottom, and then we have the guitar kind of playing a melody. If it was just that, and we said we wanted to have this open space, it would sound really thin. It would sound like, you know, oh, did something go wrong? Or, you know, the electronics are working. But the intention was to have those voices be the focus. So then, you know, adding this certain kind of ambience to it helps fill up all the rest of the frequency band. And I think, and I kind of mentioned this before in the other example, that if you use sound design correctly, it allows you to have clear percussion orchestrations. You know, it allows me to have this really open space for the guitar because we're going to hear the pitter patter of rain constant throughout as like a drone. And even here in this part of the score here, like this, you know, there's lightning in the beginning. Yeah, that's a combination of different samples, but like even that thunder sound, like it needed to have the lower frequencies kind of enhanced. So we kind of hear this. and I kind of had it so that it's not only just changing volumes like Thunder would, but I also have it so it's panning from side to side, just like the Thunder would. So that's kind of how I was, you know, reinforcing just the regular sound of that thunder. And then I used that thunder sound to kind of be that bed. We talked about beds before, where this pitter patter of rain, the pitter patter of the snares can kind of go. And then later on in the score, here's where we kind of have like the vibes playing, and I'll just play that part over here. So we have the vibes here, and we kind of have this split orchestration that just allows for it to be a little bit more visually oriented because it's still a snare feature, right? And so this space, you know, like we don't have vibes 4 and 5 playing this part right here. Not that's for volume and also, but again, the visual space it provides to kind of have a little more visual presence. And this is obvious for indoor. So I am considering that when I do write for indoor. And then we also have down here, we have the synth or the guitar. And then here it's just playing like a nice little arpeggio back and forth. And these thin moments are really nice to have, intimate moments, but it would only really be possible if we did, it's only possible because we have this kind of ambient rumble, this ambient rain sounds that kind of support it. So the idea is consider that sound design isn't just about, you know, risers and drops and stuff like that. I think using Foley effects to create a certain type of atmosphere, you know, especially in indoor where, you know, where kind of the show design kind of lends itself to that, is something that I think you should consider exploring. So just, you know, don't worry about overwriting. It's okay to be clear, full, but also clear. Hey, Jim, I think you're muted.
Trying to find my button there. There it is.
Ah, there it is.
Yeah. Let me answer a couple questions, and then I want to show maybe one more score and get some more questions, and because some of these questions are really good. Let's see. I like this one. I love that there's so much detail. Is that because you're normally not out on tour? Well, I write detail because that's like because you have to, because it doesn't, and I don't spend a lot of time on tour, but that's just because I'm old and my body can't handle much of it anymore. But I'm usually out for like 4 weeks or 5 weeks or so. But the detail writing in the score, when I proofread my scores, I go through all of that and try to get as much of it as possible so that the instructors aren't wasting time coming back to me. Hey, what's the pedaling? Hey, what are the accents? What is the sticking? We also mail out the parts before the camps, and we want players coming in with as much of the information as possible. There's another question about writing roles for notating roles for younger players, and what I wrote is pretty complicated, kind of advanced level stuff, but you could do like a double vertical rolls. They don't have to be lateral rolls, but even if you still write out that rhythm and maybe it goes from 6-tuplet to 32nd note and back, like you're going to hear some dynamic changes, and you can do like that mirror imaging thing, and then maybe you can kind of write some comfortable rhythmic speed lateral rolls. It doesn't have to be that complicated. But certainly notating those rhythms and exploring that mirror imaging thing, you're going to start to find like it's pretty fun to do it that way, and getting out of those rolls cleanly into runs or releasing rolls together is much easier because you did that. So let me show one more score quickly, and I'm kind of like trying to I'm teetering on the fence of which one I want to do. The last one, I want to do Roxanne just because I re-listened to Roxanne for the first time in like 3 or 4 years, and I realized, hey, I really like that score. Here it is. This is from 16, and this was accompanying a trombone solo, bass trombone solo. So this is a very fully orchestrated front ensemble idea, and we're working on that tango idea, and here's that tango idea. Okay, so that's orchestrated out, and simple, tango-related accessory instruments. Again, that kind of gets back to, what rack sounds do you use? Well, actually, a guiro sound is related to tango playing in some areas. So we added the guiro. We have castanets, wood blocks, those types of things that we felt were appropriate. There's a simple little kind of vibe tremolo here to build up some ideas. But then the second half of the phrase, this is what I thought was cool when I went back and listened. Like, we went full out pizzicato sound. So pizzicato string sounds in the synths, short sounds on the wood block or on the rack with wood blocks, and dead strokes on the tom, dead strokes on the marimba and vibraphone, and just trying to create real obvious changes, like drastic change between, from phrase to phrase. So let's give this a listen. I think this will work. Let's give it a try. Little color here. And so on. But again, it kind of brings me into a couple other things, and I don't know if like there's anybody who was from 16 who's on here, but I forgot how much I love this run here as well. Again, that's one of those multiple skill set kind of difficult runs that took a while to write. But what I liked about Roxanne as well, and again, if there's anybody from that time who remembers, like, I try to put in accessory sounds in obvious places, because guess what? When I do that, the color guard choreographers are going to react to that, and they're going to write work for that. You have a castanet note or a single well-placed crotale note. Or think of like the change from that first phrase, the second body, and what you would do in body choreography of like that kind of legato sound tango to that real pizzicato staccato look. But there was a time, and like a quick story, and then we'll do some questions. But in 16, where there was in one rehearsal, Michael Klesch took out a single vibroslap note out of the pit because he's like, I don't like that sound. Let's get that out of there. And then he left. And later on in ensemble rehearsal, I was down in the field, and the color guard choreographer, Michael Townsend, stopped the whole run and said, "Where is that vibroslap sound?" Like, he knew that one single note was out because he wrote guard work to it. Again, so those well-placed colors and sounds, and just putting them not too rhythmic or crazy, but just using that color so people can, like, hey, here's something to react to. Here's something to write to do, to create an effect to. So
there's a question here. It says, what's the best way to complement impact moment without overusing cymbals and drums?
I tell you, when we do our impact stuff, a lot of times that's battery driven, and that the battery writers are writing first. And Tom Hannum is great, and Travis does a good job with this too. Like, they'll say, like, I want a bass drum note here, I want a tom note here, I want this, but not overdoing the cymbal sounds, maybe you need to think highs and lows where you need to have incorporating the tam tam as a solo voice and then the cymbals are responding to it. Maybe you need to split suspended cymbals versus crash cymbals so you're getting two different sounds. I'm very particular about not doing crunchy crash sounds. Like I split suspended cymbal sounds versus China cymbal sounds versus gong sounds versus hand cymbal sounds to get different colors. And also, if you're using electronics and somebody writing soundscapes, man, you can create awesome impact samples that will do that. Like, and Natalie was on here somewhere. Natalie was triggering. There she is. Natalie was triggering all the samples in the Beast show. One of the smallest people in the core, the loudest voice, and it was those were impacts when you get and same thing with like Andrew's thunder. You know, it's like what a great sound effect. And if you have subwoofers, you're going to shake seats with that, and it doesn't have to be crunchy metallic sounds to do that. So
yep, exactly. What's the best way to write for synth that isn't just chordal support under the winds? I would say that like it kind of you're also saying remember our synth player being bored. I mean synth, you know, they should never be bored playing synth. The synth players need they need to know how exciting and important their parts are, even if it's just like a bass line. But I think, you know, obviously I think adding samples to whatever you're doing, like samples, you know, they are, even though if it's just a quarter note on beat 4, it's surprisingly like challenging, but also satisfying to finally get it. And I think considering in terms of if it's for the player that you want them to be more excited, if they can give them like, you know, samples to hit or something like that. And then also if you don't need the chordal support, like if you're only adding it because you just need a synth player to do something, then maybe you can consider using the synth to kind of flourish the bells or vibes. Like you could get a celeste sound. It doesn't need to be playing everything, but imagine if they just played an arpeggio on the release. You know, it doesn't need to be as rhythmically accurate, you know, if the player does not advance, but figuring out ways to, again, enhance the colors.
I do that quite a bit, Andrew. Of like, yeah, like doing like either like a Celeste or Fender Rhodes flange, Fender Rhodes sound to augment vibraphone sounds. And again, it goes back to the first thing you said of like, go through your sound library and find some sounds and go, oh my God, that would be cool. And then you're not going to be thinking quarterly. You may be thinking more linear as its own voice in there as well. So yeah, and in fact, that's another thing with our kind of our style at Crown. We had to be real careful with the chordal support. I like to have real simple analog pads sometimes, but if we try to do stuff when the horns are playing and it starts sending in weird frequencies into the horn tuning, it's out because it's not helping, it's hurting. And those guys hear it. You know, those guys have like crazy hearing where they hear those real fine rubs in there. So what are some other good questions? It was terrifying. Natalie, yes, it was terrifying being the Beast. And the other thing is, yeah, and don't sell short. And Natalie will tell you, like, and Andrew, you know, like the accuracy in knowing how to trigger those impact samples is an art form of knowing any kind of latency or anticipation, like yeah, this one needs to fire a grace note early. This one needs to be a 16th note late. This one has, you know, depending on the hardware and software that you're using, that's an art form in itself.
Like the ship bells.
The ship.
Those were bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's again, it was a simple bang, 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 and it's incredibly hard. And I think a lot of that was hardware related, in that particular device didn't fire as well.
How do you go about taking all those sound samples and transferring them into sheet music for someone to play? That's where you kind of use programs like, oh my God, why am I blanking right now? Mainstage, where you would just bounce. Yeah, how can I forget Mainstage? Where you just kind of record the sound that you want, and then you create a trigger within Mainstage, and then you can just, you know, in the music, you can write a little note that says, okay, depending on what you're using, a pad or a synth, you could say, all right, trigger pad 1 on beat 1 of measure 10, and then that's going to trigger that sample. So.
So I'm reading a question. It says, when filling out everybody during full ensemble moments, which instruments do you like to start with, synth versus synth? It would really be like, usually when I start the writing process, I'm writing with what I would like, what voice is going to, I think, kind of be the main focus. And it could be anything. It could be marimba. It could be vibraphone. Like the ballad started with marimba. Sometimes it could be a timpani part that's going to kind of create that kind of rhythmic foundation, or it could be an accessory instrument that kind of starts the whole process. So I guess I skip around the score. I'm going to start with the thing that most interests me or is most going to inspire my creativity, and then I fill in as necessary from there. I also always write, like, I don't know about Andrew, about you, but I need to start a phrase from the beginning and kind of go to the end. I don't do well with jumping around. I like to hear it in a linear fashion. That's just how my brain works. I don't know.
Yeah,
Andrew.
I mean, it's very difficult to write, like, you know, the impact phrase without knowing how it got there, you know?
Yeah, and I think I find it maybe a little bit easier with some with my battery writing to do that. But with the pit stuff, it's really difficult for me to do that. I have to do things, not that I have to start at the beginning of a chart, but if I start a phrase, I have to kind of see that to the end before I can go on to the next thing. So, yeah, I hope we got to a lot of your questions. You know, I think we need to start wrapping up soon. I was going to, let's see, I put a Dropbox link here. I'm going to, that had that PowerPoint there. If you know, I think that'll take you to it. I see a Dropbox thing on there, but that should have that PowerPoint of those initial things we were talking about. And again, that little pit setup thing that I did. If anyone wants to email me and say, "Hey, can I, borrow that?" I got that from Ian Moyer. He used to set up the cadets pits with that PowerPoint and just move those instruments around to get the setup and stuff. And so I stole that from him. Totally stole that from him. So, Andrew, anything else in closing, or anybody else want to have?
Well, I think there's so much that we could keep talking and going through. I know that I'm sure a lot of people that are wondering, like, oh, how do I do this? Or how, even beyond just orchestration, but just like, okay, how do I do this in Logic? How do I do this? So, but I think, like, it's important to know that, like, I didn't necessarily, like, take, 4 years studying how to do Logic in college. A lot of my knowledge just comes from using it. And then over the years, just if I run into something or an idea that I don't know how to achieve, I'm literally going to YouTube and just figuring out how to do it. And, there isn't, one person that kind of knows it all, and making sure that you don't feel like, that you have to know how to use Logic in order to just dive in. So, try not to be intimidated and just start messing around. You don't need to be great at writing marimba music. Just go in Sibelius and just mess around. There's a question like, how do I write for instruments I don't have? Mess around the piano. Maybe be inspired by something. Like, I want to make a part marimba that is only octaves. Okay, well, what can you do with that? What kind of techniques can you add with that? And just maybe even making small little parameters for yourself to help instigate a direction in terms of how you want to orchestrate your parts.
Yeah, and I think your musical knowledge will guide you in a lot of ways. Like when I'm writing those runs, like I know when it's right in my mind. I know when it's like, yeah, that sounds the way I want it. I also know like, yeah, that ain't it yet. And like a lot of the times just taking simple parts like, oh, I wrote this vibraphone part. Why does it sound thin? Well, harmonize it. You got 4 mallets, but you're writing a linear idea. Add to it. What can you do? Experiment. And again, you could do that on Sibelius. You could do that at a piano. You could do that at the vibraphone. And again, that's that roll writing style that we got to. That's me just writing out what I actually play. It's like, hey, this is what I actually do. God, that's going to take a long time to actually notate. I'd never used 64th notes before until last year, with writing out those parts. But it's like that's what I'm actually playing. So I have to find a way of capturing that. So getting on the instrument and experimenting, and again, just YouTube is a great resource. And hey, like if you write something and want people to check it out, like you could send me stuff and I'll give you feedback and say, hey, try this. And if you're, it's certainly we're here to be resources and help you out. And and the last bit of advice I give is, like, if you get an opportunity to get your stuff played, listen to the feedback from players, listen to the feedback from the instructors, because you're going to learn so much about what to do and what not to do from how people react to playing your music. It's like, hey, I would love to play this vibe part, but there's no pedaling, there's no sticking, you forgot the key signature, there's simple things like that you forget, like, hey, there's no rehearsal marks on your 4-minute score. Like, how do we rehearse this? Like simple things like that. So yeah. Okay, cool. Well, please, like, there's so many questions that are great. You can, I'll write my email is real simple. I'll put it in there, and then hand it over to Taylor if he wants to kind of wrap it up. But here's my University of Delaware. I think that's my email. Yeah. So if you want to take a picture of that and ask me some questions, I'll answer them. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And it's great seeing a lot of people on here. We had 70-something people on here talking about pit stuff, so that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's great seeing all you guys. Hopefully, we'll see you out in the real world soon. Fire off some questions for us. Again, I'm not doing anything this summer. Send me a score if you want me to look at it. So I'll be home. All right, cool. Good.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, we'll see you.